Greetings, salam, shakumaku. How are you, dear listeners? Podcasting from the old railway depot in Swamp Poodle, Washington, D.C., welcome to Iraq Matters, an epic podcast of news, ideas, and conversations about Iraq and about people who have Iraq in their story. Whether you're tuning in from Baghdad or Washington, D.C., Sinbad Island or Voyager 1, or the places in between, this podcast is for you. From the Code of Hammurabi to recent political developments, we believe that Iraq matters, and we're passionately interested in matters of Iraq. We also believe in the importance of raising awareness about the humanitarian crisis of our generation, the plight of millions of Iraqis who remain displaced, alongside millions of Syrians fleeing internal violence. I'm Eric Gustafson with Iraq Matters. Thank you for joining us as we grow a community of support for humanitarian action and peace. Here's the lay of the land for today's program.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In today's podcast, we'll be focusing on party politics in Iraq. My name is David Slater, and I have Chris Sullivan, our new fall intern, sitting next to me. In the United States, we have two main political parties with a handful of well-known third parties. Iraq, on the other hand, has many, many political parties. In Iraq's last parliamentary elections in 2010, 86 officially approved parties competed for 325 seats of parliament. Chris, can you take us through the list of those political parties?
You have the Alliance of Independent Democrats, Assyria Liberation Party, the Assyrian Patriotic Party, Badr Organization, Constitutional Monarch Movement, General Conference of Iraqi People, the Grand List, Green Party of Iraq.
As you can see, there are many parties in Iraq. Luckily, in today's podcast, we have two interviews to help explain some of Iraq's political parties. Our first interview is a continuation of our previous discussion with Ahmed Ali. After our interview with Ahmed, I talk with Joel Wing and find out what exactly caused him to start his blog called Musings on Iraq. Following my discussion with Joel, we turn our spotlight to Kim Schultz, who is an actress and New York-based advocate. But before our interviews, we have our campaign update with Leslie and our Iraq update with Joel Wing.
Thanks, David. Here at Epic, we're campaigning to put Iraq back on the agenda. Our petition on change.org now has the support of over 3,400 signers, but we still need you. You can sign and share our petition at iraqmatters.org. So why are we doing this campaign? Iraq body count reports that over 480 civilians have been killed so far this month. According to the UN, violence in July claimed the lives of 1,057 Iraqis and wounded another 2,326, the worst violence seen in more than 5 years. More than 3 million Iraqis remain displaced, adding to the regional humanitarian crisis that includes 5.9 million displaced Syrians. Since Thursday, almost 30,000 Syrians have poured over the border, the UN reports. Today is Tuesday, August 20th. It has been 618 days since President Barack Obama last met with Iraq's Prime Minister and last made any public statement about the ongoing U.S. commitment to the people of Iraq. Here at Epic, we believe the escalating violence in Iraq demands more attention at the highest levels, and President Obama's leadership can make a critical difference. Join us in urging President Obama and Congress to do more to support strong humanitarian action and diplomacy for a more peaceful Iraq. You can join our growing community of supporters at iraqmatters.org. Epic is also participating in the Start a Riot Challenge on CrowdRise. Please donate to our fundraiser to expand our Photo Voice Iraq project to Baghdad and Domiz. To donate, visit crowdrise.com/enabling-peace. Shukran, listeners. Now here's David and Joel Wing with the Iraq update.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In today's Iraq update, we have Joel Wing.
Hi, how's it going?
So, Joel, what has happened in Iraq over the past month?
Well, the biggest political story today in Iraq is about Muqtada al-Sadr. He just recently announced that he is withdrawing from politics. This is a big, huge story in Iraq. He said he's tired of the political system and all the maneuverings that are going on in the country, so he said he's withdrawing from it basically this is a political ploy that he's done before in Iraq, where he's trying to get his followers to say that they're loyal to him and they'll follow to him. So you've had a whole bunch of announcements. A whole bunch of his militia leaders, for example, just signed a paper to him and sent it to him where he's staying in Iran right now, saying that they're still loyal to him, and they put their thumbprints on it, signed in blood. His parliamentarians have been talking about how they promised to follow his orders now, and they'll push for the political reforms that they said they've been doing, but they haven't. So that's the biggest political news right now, whether he'll come back or not, whether it's real or not, how his followers are trying to get him to return to politics. But it's basically a political ploy, like I said, that he's done before, where he's just trying to get his followers to get more riled up and pledge their loyalty to him and make sure everybody's on the same boat, same page, basically. And he's done this before. His political movement, especially the military side, has always been very fractious. There's always been groups and people who've broken away from his movement. The militia was never really centrally controlled. So he's done this before, where he said he's withdrawing, he's pulling back to get his followers to say, no, come back, and pledge their loyalty to him. So this is the biggest news politically that's going on in Iraq right now. Another thing that's going on is that Iraq's foreign minister, Zabari, was just in Washington, D.C. He met with Secretary of State John Kerry. They've discussed the relationship between the two countries. You know, since the military withdrawal from Iraq, the Obama administration has really put Iraq on the back step. It's trying to forget about the whole war and move on to other things and not really trying to get involved in the Middle East, in fact, at all, really. The main things Zabari is talking about is he wants more military support from the United States, since attacks are going up in Iraq. They want drones, they want training, other kind of military support. John Kerry actually seems like he's more interested in Iraq than the rest of the administration. So they made a bunch of announcements about how they'll still cooperate. Some people in the U.S. military have also said they're willing to give training. So far, it's just in talks. I don't know how far that's going to be, because there's a lot of people in the Iraqi parliament who are opposed to the United States having any kind of presence there. The Sadrists, who I just talked about, for example, said they reject any kind of cooperation with the Iraqi military. The other thing that's going on is that obviously violence is going up. The Iraqi government continually announces new military campaigns against the insurgents. The latest one is called the Revenge of the Martyrs, which is taking place in Baghdad, Anbar, Salahuddin, Diyala provinces. And this is actually bringing about a lot of criticisms from the Sunnis. The Sunni protest movement and also Speaker Najafi's political party have claimed that the government is carrying out ethnic cleansing against the Sunnis in provinces. They claim that they're being targeted by the government, which in part they are, because the government thinks the Sunnis are behind the insurgency. So they are carrying out mass arrests, but protest movement and the Sunni political parties are trying to make a big issue out of this. Ironically, the protest movement has claimed that Sunnis are not responsible for any violence at all in Iraq. They basically have now said that they deny that there's an insurgency in Iraq, and they're claiming that all the violence, all the bombings, everything is done by either the Iraqi government or Shia militias backed by Iran. So you've got this whole disconnect. There's two political discourses going on in the country. One, you've got the government saying, you know, the Sunni insurgency, they're taking off. It's all these foreign countries, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc., that's behind it. Syria conflict is a big problem. The Sunni protest movement, and some, but not all, the Sunni political parties saying we're not responsible for any violence at all. It's all the government. The government's behind everything. So it's just a huge disconnect between what the different sides and people are talking about in Iraq, which obviously is going to lead to problems, because if you can't even talk about the same issues going on in the country, then you can't make any progress. You can't make any deals, which is what Iraq really needs, is political compromise to overcome the ongoing violence in the country. And that's basically the main things that happened this month.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joel, for joining us today and for your Iraq update. And for the listeners, if you'd like to read more about Joel, you can visit his blog, which is called Musings on Iraq. And once again, thank you very much, Joel.
Thanks.
And now we will hear part 2 of our interview with Ahmed Ali. If you remember from our previous podcast, Ahmed focused on politics and the security situation in Iraq. For today's podcast, we will delve deeper into those two topics. We had originally intended on airing Ahmed's full interview, but due to time constraints, we had to cut some material. The following material is contextual, so before every segment I will give some background information to better prepare you for the following conversations. In our previous podcast, Ahmed discussed how the Iraqi government is formed. Iraq has a parliamentary system where the Iraqi people elect officials to represent them at the national parliament. Once members of parliament are elected, they gather to create coalitions. The coalition which can secure the most members of parliament elects the executive, who is the prime minister. Ahmed states that the relationship between the national government and the provincial governments are supposed to be similar to the U.S. federal and state governments. However, Iraq is having difficulty transitioning to powerful provincial governments due to its long history of a strong centralized government. In the following segment, I ask Ahmed more questions about provincial and national governments. For the provincial governments, are the political parties the same as those that are found in the national government?
The major political parties, yes, but what we have seen throughout the three provincial elections that have taken place since 2005 is that you always have local political parties and local personalities that will compete and in some cases even beat the major parties and have a good presence, because it is a famous saying, I think by former Speaker Tip O'Neill, that all politics is local, and that is absolutely the case in Iraq. All politics is local. When you talk about provincial governments and provincial elections, you have to be a recognized personality, and people have to know about your background, people have to know about what you have done for the province, and that's how you get vote. It's not necessarily about the political party you're part of. What I want to draw attention to when it comes to provincial governments is that government formation within provincial governments is also very similar to government formation on the national level. In other words, you still have to negotiate unless you are able to go above the threshold of formal government, which has happened in some cases, but in most cases it is again about coalition building, it is again about negotiations.
Do these parties having to negotiate in order to figure out who's in power, does that create some sort of gridlock?
It does, and especially if you talk about provinces where you have economic significance. So we look at Basra, for example. That's a province in which the political parties care a great deal and seek to occupy senior positions because it's a rich oil province. It's also close to the Iranian border. It is an economic hub for Iraq in many ways. It has Iraq's only ports and maritime borders, so it's important for some provinces. In other provinces like Diyala, it is about the sectarian balance within the government, because Diyala is a mixed province, and you have to pay attention to the needs of the Iraqi Shia in the province, the Iraqi Sunnis, and the Iraqi Kurds. So sometimes it takes a long time. But what we have seen so far, and the assessment is that the provincial governance in Iraq is here to stay. There is a demand for it, there is a desire for it, and the Iraqi voters have shown a tendency and a desire to vote people out if they don't like, which makes politicians very nervous to perform and deliver services. They don't succeed every time, but they know that when it comes to election time, they may be punished electorally.
In the next segment, I ask Ahmed about some of the dynamics within the Shia political community. We focus on two political parties, the Sadrist Trend and the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, also called ISKI. In this segment, Ahmed provides background information for ISKI, but not for the Sadrist Trend. The Sadrist Trend is Muqtada Sadr's political wing. Muqtada Sadr came to notoriety for his militia called Jaish al-Mahdi, or JAM, which in English means the Mahdi Army. JAM previously has clashed with coalition forces, other Shia militias, and al-Qaeda in Iraq, but is currently disbanded. In 2008, JAM essentially changed its name to the Promise Day Brigade, which is still active to this day. Recently, on the website for the Institute of the Study of War, you published a blog which is called The Revival of the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq. In this blog, which you wrote, you described that it appears that the Sadrists and the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, also called ISKI, that they seem to be helping each other out. even though back in 2007 they clashed, specifically in Karbala. What do you see is the purpose behind this? Are they trying to overthrow Maliki?
I think it's important to highlight ISKI's revival. I mentioned earlier that since 2010, because of the election results, they have been on the margins of Iraqi politics. However, that changed with the recent provincial elections, in which ISKI was able to secure some gains, and as you mentioned, David, was able to form governments in some provinces in southern Iraq with a Sadrist in an alliance. The nature of that alliance is very anti-Maliki. It is intended to prove to Prime Minister Maliki that he has competitors and he has other groups that can take over the role of Iraqi Shia political leadership. And ISKI at the moment is positioned to play that role, or at least play a king-making role in forming the government.
In our first podcast, Eric asks Ahmed to explain what factors are causing the recent surge of violence in Iraq. Ahmed says that the groups which were active in 2005-2006, such as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are resurging. AQI is attempting to recreate the violence similar to what was seen in 2006, specifically after the bombing of the Golden Mosque in Samarra. Ahmed also mentions that AQI has been re-energized by the fighting in Syria. In the following segment, Eric and I ask Ahmed to further expound on some of the Shia militias and tactics used by these militias. We will use the acronym AAH, which stands for Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq, which in English means League of the Righteous. AAH is a Shia militia which turned to politics after the U.S. withdrawal in 2011. In the article which I previously mentioned, its name is Iraq's Sectarian Crisis Reignites as Shia Militias Execute Civilians and Remobilize. You bring up a point that AAH had a parade on May 4th, basically where they kind of flaunted their power. How was this allowed? Why did Maliki allow this to even happen?
AAH was officially formed according to its own announcements to fight U.S. forces when they were in Iraq, and according to the leader of the group, Qais al-Khazali, AAH has been involved in over 5,000 attacks against U.S. forces. One major attack that drew attention was the kidnapping of U.S. soldiers in Karbala, 2007, and the execution of those soldiers in the province. AAH was not part of the political process then. It was a completely militant activity. After the withdrawal of U.S. forces, AAH decided to join the political process and become a player in the politics of the country. When that decision was made, it had the support and the welcoming of Prime Minister Maliki. For Prime Minister Maliki, endorsing AAH is a good opportunity to weaken his Sadrist rival, because Prime Minister Maliki and the Sadrist have disagreements, and those disagreements in some cases were violent disagreements. So if AAH is able to be on Prime Minister Maliki's side, Prime Minister Maliki will benefit from it by targeting the Sadrist and weakening them. Because we have to keep in mind that the composition of AAH and the Promised Day Brigade is the same constituency, which is Iraqi Shia in different places who are one way or another loyal and adherents to the Sadrist principles that were established by Muqtada Sadr's father.
There was, in some of your recent analysis, your recent Iraq updates for the Institute, you all talked about evidence or receiving evidence that there were checkpoints being reestablished again, these illegal checkpoints in the streets of Baghdad that were being used to presumably carry out sectarian killings. And it sounds like the League of the Righteous was one of the most likely militias that were involved in those checkpoints. How did you all learn about that taking place?
Yeah, when those activities picked up, there was a great deal of reporting on them in Iraqi media sources. And Iraqi media is flourishing in many ways because you have hundreds of media outlets and they report on the various issues that take place in the country. And when the initial reports surfaced, there was skepticism about those checkpoints. However, more confirmation started to surface in the different media outlets. When those reports surfaced, they were of course denied by the government because the appearance of checkpoints in Baghdad, especially because it was mostly in Baghdad, as I mentioned earlier, undermines the government's mandate and authority to say that we can provide security for you. It leads the population to seek protection from other groups. The denial was followed by visits by different Iraqi government officials to those areas in which the population and the residents of the areas were saying we have seen checkpoints set up similar to what happened in 2005, 2006, especially 2006 when the civil war in Iraq was at its peak. Plus, what we saw in terms of reaction from the residents of Baghdad was very telling, because the residents of Baghdad have gotten used to violence and it has become routine for them. So when a bombing takes place, it's not surprising to see people go to the same location shortly after the bombing takes place. But when the reports of militia remobilization and activity in Baghdad surfaced, people of Baghdad decided to stay home, which was something similar to what they did in 2006 and 2007. Plus
So it really disrupted business, commerce for the whole city.
Commerce was, especially commercial activity, was greatly affected by it because there was hesitancy from merchants from outside of Baghdad to come to the city and conduct business because they were afraid of those checkpoints. Mm-hmm. What also surfaced during that period of time is kidnappings of civilians in some places, and also the discovery of bodies in different parts of Baghdad that had been killed execution style, something very similar to what we saw in 06, 07. So the evidence was very strong, and of course social media is taking off in Iraq and is a good source for news, and a great number of Iraqis were talking about what was happening.
And were they
on the
actually even
Baghdad.
like snapping pictures with phones and then tweeting them out of the checkpoints and of the other telltale signs of this?
There were some, but not in a detailed way. Mm-hmm. What the Iraqis were saying on Facebook and Twitter is that the atmosphere at the moment reminds us of 2006, 2007. We just can't leave our houses. We would rather stay in. Now, it has to be said that didn't continue beyond the first week of June. It is likely that those groups faced pressure from Prime Minister Maliki and other groups to tamp down that activity and not repeat it. But for about 2 weeks, fear gripped the streets of Baghdad.
We're going to take a quick break from our interview with Ahmed to check back with Chris.
Iraqi Turkmen Front, Islamic Action, Islamic Call Party, Islamic Dawah Party, Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, Islamic Virtue Party, Kurdistan Alliance, Kurdistan
The list continues.
Reserve Democratic Party.
We will now return to the final portion of our interview with Ahmed Ali. In our final segment, we discuss the medical status of Jalal Talabani, the incident at Hawija where Iraqi security forces raided a protest site, and efforts which the U.S. and international community can undertake to assist Iraq in the 2014 elections.
What have been major political developments in Iraq in the last couple years that we haven't covered in this interview?
Well, things in Iraq change very quickly. So I would have you look and direct the audience to examine what has been happening since December of last year, so essentially the last 7 months. And we have had 3 major issues. The first one is the protest in primarily Iraqi Sunni areas in 6 provinces to be exact. And those protests were triggered by Iraqi security forces arresting the bodyguards of former finance minister Rafi al-Isawi. And those protests were very big when they began. Now they have not been able to maintain the same size for a variety of reasons, but they have been a defining feature of Iraqi Sunni politics, at least for the last 7 months. Within the protest itself, the defining event was an operation by the Iraqi security forces in a town called Hawija in Kirkuk, in which Iraqi security forces surrounded the protest site in that town and demanded the handover of suspects in the killing of 3 Iraqi soldiers. Days before that, there was a raid of that protest site, and about 50 to 55 individuals were killed in that raid. And that event has become a major rallying point for the Iraqi Sunni community. The second event that's major is the health of President Jalal Talabani. President Jalal Talabani has been, he's an Iraqi Kurd, he's the leader of the PUK, and he has been the president of Iraq since 2005. His personality is one that has enabled him to sometimes mediate different tensions and mediate different clashes in some cases. So he played a conciliatory role on some issues. In December he had a stroke and he had to be flown to Germany, and he has been in Germany ever since. And there hasn't been personality that's able to play the same role that he played. Therefore, his absence has left a gap in Iraqi politics. Third event, and the big event that has taken place is provincial elections in April of this year. And those elections, the results have come out, and those results and the government formation in different provinces is a prelude to what might transpire in the 2014 elections. So overall, it has been changing 6 to 7 months for Iraq, much more dynamic than what the country is used to. And of course, the violence has to be coupled with those events. So Iraq is not the same Iraq that was when U.S. forces withdrew in December 2011. It's a much more different country now.
What role should the United States and international community play in leading up to next year's national parliamentary elections?
The biggest role that the United States government and the international community can play is support the election commission in Iraq, because the conduct of the provincial elections was professional.
Is that IHEC what you're talking about?
That's the Independent High Electoral Commission, IHEC. The conduct of IHEC during the elections was professional. There were fears that the elections might not be free and fair, but IHEC and other groups, including the political parties, were able to, in fact, carry out good elections. But these are the provincial elections, and the signs from them are encouraging. However, the 2014 elections are different, and if there is going to be any pressure on IHEC, the commission might not be able to resist that pressure. They might easily fall to that pressure, affecting the results of the election. So support to IHEC will be very important, and the international community is doing that. It has to continue, and it has to be sustained, and it has to focus on increasing IHEC's capacity.
A related question, I understand that there's still not a political party law in Iraq. So currently political parties could get outside money, foreign money, and seems to be a lot of foreign money in Iraqi politics today. There is a lack of transparency, and one wonders if sometimes elected officials in Iraq are more beholden to foreign interests than to their own constituents. Where are things at in terms of passage of a political party law? And do you think it might happen before the parliamentary elections next year?
Discussions about the political party law in Iraq are almost continuous. Different political parties will bring them up every once in a while and say the country needs such a law. But there doesn't seem to be any indication that there is seriousness to push for a party law, because as you highlight, Eric, when you have a party law, you have to disclose your funding. And all the major political parties are not inclined to say where they get their funding from. So if there's one issue that unify the Iraqi political parties despite their differences, it is actually not having a political party law.
Lack of transparency.
That is helpful to them. So so there is no serious push to have a political party law. The result of it, however, is that political parties, especially the big ones, are able to compete with much more resources compared to the smaller parties. So it doesn't help the political system or allow the political system to function in a more equal way.
And that is the end of our interview with Ahmed Ali. Be sure to visit understandingwar.org to read some of his articles, or you can add him on Twitter @IraqShamil. Now, let's see how Chris is doing.
Party, Reconciliation and Liberation Bloc, Sadrist Movement, State of Law, Supreme Council of Islamic Revolution, the Awakening Councils, the Iraqis, the Sadrist Current, the Upholders of the Message, and the Yazidi Movement for Reform and Progress.
And those were the 86 parties which ran for the 2010 Iraqi national parliamentary elections. In our final segment, Leslie will spotlight Kim Schultz and her efforts in advocating for Iraqi refugees.
This week, we'd like to highlight the work of Kim Schultz, a New York-based actress, writer, teacher, and Iraqi advocate. This Minnesota native hasn't always been an advocate for Iraqi refugees. She runs her own improv school, Kim Schultz Improv, and is even a licensed referend in the states of New York and Minnesota. However, in 2009, Intersections International, as part of their Iraqi Voices Amplification Project, commissioned Schultz to write a play highlighting the humanitarian crisis affecting Iraqi refugees. Having no previous background in the Middle East, Schultz traveled across Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria with 7 other artists, connecting with refugees and their heartbreaking stories. One such refugee was Omar, an Iraqi who Schultz fell in love with while she was in Syria. Her journey was transformative and one she would never forget. Upon returning to the United States, Schultz wrote No Place Called Home, a one-woman play directed by Sarah Cameron Sund with music written and performed by Amikila Gaston. Schultz narrates the play and portrays 11 different Iraqi characters that have fled their native country. The play ran in New York off-Broadway before touring universities and stages across the country, including the Kennedy Center for World Refugee Day in 2012. Today, Schultz continues to tour No Place Called Home, spreading awareness of Iraq's ongoing displacement crisis across the United States. Since her journey with Intersections International, Schultz has written several articles about Iraqi refugees and Story Diary, a piece that was part of the Veterans Book Project. She's currently finishing her upcoming memoir, My Iraqi Love Story, which tells the story of Schultz's 3-year fight for a chance of love with a man stranded in Syria. To learn more about Kim Schultz and her advocacy for Iraqi refugees, you can visit her website, kimschultz.net, or follow her on Twitter @KimSchultz1.
Thank you, Leslie, for spotlighting Kim Schultz. We will now listen to our final segment of this week's podcast, my interview with Joel Wing. Hello, Joel. My name is David with the Education for Peace in Iraq Center, and I've been following you a little bit online, specifically with your blogs called Musings on Iraq. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and your blog?
Yeah, I've been writing my blog since 2008. I try to publish 4 stories a week about Iraqi affairs, try to cover everything, anything that interests me. So the security situation, politics, economics, just wide variety of things. I also post videos, anything interesting that I find, not just daily news, but also the think tank videos, things like that. So I just try to cover a wide variety of information about what's going on in Iraq these days.
Okay, and the reason that you do this, I know you said it interests you, but is there another reason, such as raising awareness in the United States?
Well, my original interest, I was in college when the Gulf War started, so I did some research, a little writing about Iraq then. But what really started my interest is right after 9/11. I think it was either the day of 9/11. You know, flipping through the news, watching all this stuff, and the former CIA chief was on CBS News, I think, and he made this really comment that caught my mind that I always remember. He said, even if Iraq is not involved in 9/11, the United States should attack and overthrow Saddam. And I just said, what is this guy talking about? Everybody says it's Al-Qaeda, you know, people said that right from the bat, and this guy's talking about Iraq. And I just didn't know why he even said that, and I just really wondered about it. And then more and more people started talking about, yes, Iraq, and that's really what started my interest in the subject. So that was probably 2002. I started researching and started writing like essays and stuff and a lot of forums and stuff like that. And that's really what got me interested in writing about Iraq. You know, the whole war, everything. You know, obviously now the United States military is out of Iraq, but it's still a big interest. I want people to know about what's going on in the country. And just for my own personal interest, this has obviously become a passion for me about what's going on in the country. So that's basically why I run my blog.
Right. Okay. So obviously back in 2002, you know, Iraq was the hot topic. Is it still that way? Is the Obama administration, do you know exactly what they're doing towards Iraq?
Yeah, I think both the public and the government right now is basically war weary. They're trying to forget about Iraq and put it in the back burner and basically forget about it. The Obama administration basically said, we want to pull out the troops. They did that. They had withdrawal. And then they just tried to say, we're going to deal with Iraq like it's a normal country. You know, Tunisia, Morocco, whatever country in the region, you know, Turkey, we're just going to treat Iraq the exact same way. And so they've just trying to basically put it aside, forget it. Iraq was bad. Iraq was the Bush administration. We don't really want to focus on it. I think that actually has changed a little bit because John Kerry, I think the new Secretary of State, has tried to put a little more emphasis on Iraq. You know, he just went out there, I don't know, a couple months ago. I think he wants to give it a little more attention than it was before, but I think the Obama administration is basically trying to forget about it.
Right. Do you think that what's happening in Syria and Iraq, it's obviously tied together? You know, there's been many high-profile organizations. The UN has said so. NPR has said so. You know, basically this conflict is merging into one conflict. Do you think the fact that the spotlight right now is on Syria will help to push the United States and the Obama administration to focus once again, or at least turn some attention towards Iraq? I
actually, from my opinion, I think the Obama administration has like an Iraq syndrome. You know, after the Vietnam War, there's the Vietnam syndrome. People in the United States and the government didn't want to get involved in another foreign war. You know, there's a really turnoff amongst the public. And I think the Obama administration still has that idea right now. They don't want to get involved in Syria. And I can sort of understand that. There's a lot of different insurgent groups, a lot of different people there fighting each other. It's really hard to pick sides, you know, who we're going to give weapons to or whatever. Although, from what I understand, the CIA is over there right now giving arms, and we're going to try to increase that. But I think they're trying to actually stay out of Syria in a big way, although covertly they might be doing something. So I think it's the same kind of thing. They don't want to get involved in Iraq again. They're trying to stay out of Syria, though they're doing some things over there. So media-wise, it's getting more attention now because for a while, Iraq just disappeared from a lot of the headlines in the newspapers unless there's some big bombing. So
right.
The newspapers are talking about Iraq a little more than they were before in America. But I think the administration would still, if they could, they would like to forget about it and go on to something else.
In one of your recent interviews, you talked about a link between the Iraqi security force tactics and the tactics used by coalition forces in the early years of the invasion. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so from the surge 2007 to the United States military left in 2011, the whole emphasis was on counterinsurgency operations. We're going to put the troops out in the neighborhoods, work with the Iraqi security forces really closely, work with the community. We had all these job programs, money for development, little, starting markets, whatever, stuff like that. And so the idea was to get the population to work with the security forces, try to get preventive measures out there, because the better relationship with the population, the more intelligence you get, things like that. And then when the U.S. forces left, the Iraqi military reverted right back to what a lot of, traditional military does around the world, not just in Iraq. They thought about, we want to have external security, we want F-16 fighters, we want to buy more M1 Abrams tanks, and they just basically forgot everything they were doing with the United States. So now the Iraqi forces are basically a reactive force. There's some bombing. They go out to the bombing. They cordon off the area. They arrest a whole bunch of people. They go out to Anbar province. They've had about 4 major operations out there in the last couple months, where they go out to the Syrian border region. They stay out there for 3 or 4 days. They do all these raids. They try to find the camps, and then they leave.
Right. Do you think that these tactics that they're using, you mentioned like cordoning off an area and rounding up a bunch of people who are in the area, do you think that breeds more insurgency and more terrorism?
Yeah, it's exactly what the United States did before the surge. It just makes everybody mad, because from what I've read, they don't just arrest all the fighting age men. They take away families too, women and children. There was a report, I think it was Human Rights Watch, about, they rounded up this one village in Saladin province, maybe 40 women and children included. They tortured them, they electrocuted them, they suffocated them, and they released them a couple weeks later. But, it's mass arrests. Everybody gets rounded up. So it's definitely making the situation worse. Going to some area for 2 or 3 days and leaving, it just means the insurgents move off, and when the security forces are gone, they move right back in. The mass arrests are obviously making people a lot mad. And the Sunni regions have a lot of complaints anyways. So it just adds to the idea, because for those people who are getting raided, they're thinking the reason why the government's coming in is they're Shia, we're Sunnis. It's a sectarian issue for them. So it's just inflaming the whole situation. It's making it worse. And it's got no possibility of stopping anything.
Right. So do you think that if the Iraqi security forces were to revert to what they were taught by coalition forces, and that is counterinsurgency operations rather than indiscriminate rounding up of individuals, do you think that would help with the security situation?
Yeah, it would take a long time, because the feeling right now is really, really bad. You've got these ongoing protests in a lot of Sunni cities in northern, eastern, and western Iraq. I mean, it would take a long time to turn the population around, but it would definitely be a lot better. I'm not sure, it would probably take years to get the security situation under control, because the insurgency is just totally reborn right now. It's taken off, but it would definitely be a lot better. It would just take a lot of time. It's just like the United States. It took a long time to get things turned around.
Right. And then I have a question for you regarding the upcoming elections in 2014. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, Iraq was actually affected by the Arab Spring. There were massive protests that were happening all throughout the country. And Prime Minister Maliki, he reacted by doling out concessions, one of which is he cut his pay in half. Another is that he promised that he wouldn't run in the 2014 election. Do you believe that he will actually keep this promise? No.
He's definitely running again. He's already preparing for it. They just had provincial elections this year. He got more parties to join his state of law list. He's definitely preparing for 2014. It's going to be really, really hard on him, though. Traditionally, you have all these different factions, political parties, and political figures who really don't like each other. There's a lot of bad blood between these people that date back all the way to Saddam period. And that helped out Maliki, because there's a lot of people who don't like him, but they couldn't agree on a replacement. But now, with the security getting so bad, services, have not improved. They're still really bad. Electricity is still really spotty, stuff like that. And Maliki is taking a lot of the blame. There's news reports in the Iraqi papers all the time. Protests started again in southern Iraq, for example, against electricity. They're blaming Maliki. His opponents, a couple of them, started talking about, we need to get rid of Maliki. We need a national unity government because security is so bad. So he's taking all the blame. So I don't know who might be a figure who might emerge to become a replacement for Maliki. So he's still got that going for him. He's still the prime minister, which means he controls all this money and security forces that can use for carrot and sticks approaches to win people over, to remain in power. But it's going to be really tough. But he's definitely going to run again.
Okay. And then I guess in closing, my final question for you is, whenever people talk about Iraq and they want to learn some more information, what's something that immediately comes to your mind that you wish everybody could know?
One thing that I always think about when I think about Iraq is obviously people, especially in America, their image of Iraq is it's a mess. There's insurgency, there's bombings. They just think everything is horrible over there. Basically, the image is it's the Civil War and it just never ended. Since 2005, the same thing has been going on. And that's actually not really true. Even now, with security deteriorating and the insurgency taking off again, it's really in certain provinces. And even within those provinces, for example, Anbars gets a lot of attention. The violence there isn't that bad. It's in specific cities. There's other cities that are completely retouched. And if you live in northern Iraq and Kurdistan, and if you live in southern Iraq, places like Basra, Najaf, stuff like that, Maysan, there's actually very, very, very little violence. Like a province like Muthana, I don't even know when the last period of violence was there. So there's actually, even though the security situation is getting really bad right now, for a lot of Iraqis, life is pretty normal. You go to work, you go to school, you complain about the government because we don't have electricity, the water supply's not that good and stuff, but life is really going on pretty normally there. They have projects going on, people building stuff, they're hoping the economy turns around. The mood right now is getting people really worried about what's happening, what's going on in the future. But for a lot of Iraqis, life is pretty normal, and people just really don't realize that. They just think it's bombing, it's hell over there, everything's bad.
Right. Well, that is very encouraging to hear, and I hope that we're able to inform a lot of people to let them know that, it's not all violence over there.
Yeah.
So, Joel, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to talking with you in the future when you give an Iraq update.
Thanks a lot.
This has been Iraq Matters, an epic podcast of news, ideas, and conversations about Iraq. Thank you so much for joining us. We would like to also thank our special guests, Ahmed Ali of the Institute for the Study of War and Joe Wing of the blog Musings on Iraq. Our theme music is On the Top of the Palm Tree by Nadhim Al-Ghazali, and our transitional music is from Rahim Al-Hajj's title track, The Second Baghdad. You can subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Now for two special announcements. First, we have joined the Start a Riot Challenge to raise money to expand our fieldwork in Iraq, specifically expanding our Photo Voice program to include Syrian refugees at Domi's camp and also young people in the city of Baghdad. You can support that fundraising effort at crowdrise.com/enablingpeace. Secondly, we want to put a special shout out to Wasan in Michigan, Reginald and Jamie in the Washington, D.C. area, Len and Judy of Owego, New York, and Akil, Mashan, and Ibrahim in Iraq for volunteering to spread the word about our petition to put Iraq back on the agenda. You can sign that petition at iraqmatters.org. And you can also contact us to join the campaign at campaign@epic-usa.org. Now, we want to hear from you. Email your suggestions and questions to iraqmatters@yahoo.com. We will answer your questions and letters in our next podcast. Thank you so much again for joining us. This is Epic Director Eric Gustafson reminding you and friends around the world that Iraq matters.